we have Eloy Retana on the call. Eloy, I really appreciate your time. And everybody, you need to stop what you're doing right now, hit pause on this episode, and find the Savvy Mobile Home Park Investor Show. And subscribe to that as well, especially if you're into real estate investing and mobile home parks. And I know you do some multifamilies as well, but I really appreciate you joining us here today.
Hey, thank you for inviting me, Jack. It's a pleasure to be here, and thanks for the plug on the podcast.
So no, absolutely. I can't recommend it enough, and people should really check it out.
Thank you.
So let's could we start from the beginning here? How did you get into mobile home park real estate?
Well, if we go back to the beginning, like most people, I started out doing single family rentals, either through lease options and later through doing sub twos and creative financing. So that's kind of how that was my start into real estate. But this was 20 years ago. I'm a 19 manager as a full-time job, and at that time I had decided that I was trying to bounce. Do I want to do more real estate, or do I want to focus on my career? And at that time, IT was just blowing up. So I made the decision to kind of focus on my career, and then I would onesie twosie, some acquisitions here and there. But it was more of a long-term play, right? Kind of build out for retirement. That was my thought initially. As time went on, I learned to wholesale. I did a flip here and there, but it wasn't really for me. I thought, those were more transactional, and I wasn't really looking for another job. And I felt like, well, wholesaling just seems like another job, and flipping feels like another job. So I don't need another job. I already have one. So that's kind of how I started down the road of real estate as a whole.
Sure. And then how do you ended up kind of specializing more into the mobile home and the mobile parks, right?
Yeah. So as time went on, my now partner, we had become friends, and about probably 8 or 9 years ago, and he was doing full-time flips and wholesaling and new builds out in Colorado Springs, but he kind of saw the writing on the wall, and he didn't want to do that kind of work anymore. So he asked me. He started doing a lot of underwriting training through Anthony Char's group. And, he had asked me about partnering with him on picking up some multifamily. And that was the first time I had ever heard of apartments or multifamily or anything along those lines. I didn't realize it was a thing.
Mm-hmm.
So the first time he brought it up to me, I was like, whatever, I don't have millions of dollars to go buy multifamily, right? That was my initial reaction.
Mm-hmm.
And, and he started telling me about, why it was a better play than trying to do single family homes. And around that time, I started attending a lot of the meetups here in Denver, where one of the local syndicators here, Adam Adams here in Denver, he started talking about basically the same thing, right? Multifamily, how you can reach your goals a lot quicker by teaming up with somebody, like-minded, and going for bigger acquisitions. And that made a lot of sense to me. So when we started down the road of looking for apartments and multifamily, we quickly found out that Denver was overpriced. I live here in Denver. Even back then, 3 or 4 years ago, everything was just none of the numbers made sense. So we started looking at other alternative markets, Colorado Springs, Pueblo, even down into Albuquerque and Phoenix, but we couldn't seem to find anything that made sense. And right around that time, this has probably been now 2.5 years ago, he came up to me and he said, "Hey, I think I got something down in Florida." Because we decided that we were going to focus on Phoenix, KC, and Orlando as our main target markets.
Mm-hmm.
So he found a trailer park in Orlando, in that area. And when he initially brought it up to me, I was like, "A trailer park? No way. I'm not interested. How do we go from looking for an apartment complex to finding a trailer park?" It just didn't make any sense to me. So I was immediately, there was just no way I was interested in that. But he said, "No, look at these numbers. We're never going to find an apartment complex with these sort of numbers." And I looked at it and I thought, wow. I took a step back and I told him, I said, okay, look, give me a week. Give me a week to bury myself in as much education as I can about mobile home parks. So I did. I spent the next 7 to 10 days downloading and listening to every audiobook I can get my hands on, and every podcast on the subject. And at the end of that 7 days, I thought to myself, not only is this a better an asset for us, being that we're trying to find our first deal, but I think as the economy turns, and it's a better asset class for us to be invested in personally, and to be able to share with our friends and potential partners that might want to be invested in something like this. Because everybody that I know, at least in Denver, everybody's pursuing apartments. So how about we offer something slightly different, right, than your typical apartment complex? Not to say we wouldn't do multifamily, we would. It's just that at that time, and still right now, it's very difficult to find cash flowing deals, and we find it a little bit easier to find cash flowing deals if we go with mobile home parks.
Sure. Well, can you talk about, you mentioned the numbers. Can you talk about the numbers a little bit? Like how do people run the numbers on a mobile home park versus a multifamily? I mean, there are a pretty significant difference between the two, right?
Well, and the big difference you got to be aware of, I would say, is the private utilities, because you don't have to deal with septic systems in an apartment complex, right? It's usually all city water, city sewage.
Mm-hmm.
In some instances, not in every instance, every deal is different and every park is different. Some of the older parks, there's still some parks out there that have lagoons, right, and that pumping stations and that sort of thing. I generally stay away from that stuff. But my partner Steve, he had built cabins out in the middle of the forest out here in Colorado Springs. So he was used to septic systems and water wells. So it wasn't a big deal for him. For me, it took a little bit of getting used to. I was like, why do we want to tackle that if we don't have to, right?
Mm-hmm.
Ideally, we would want public utilities, right? City water, city sewage. But that's not every case. There's some parks and good deals to be had if you're willing to look at a septic system, a park with a septic system, or a park with a water well. You just have to understand that and be aware that you are responsible for that maintenance. So those are the sort of things that you have to be aware of, that are a little bit different from apartments. The other thing that I would say is a little different would be some of the grandfathering issues with the mobile home park, because the rules keep changing with regards to grandfathering of units and certain parks. You don't get that with apartments. So you have to be aware of that. But in terms of underwriting, I would say it's very similar. I mean, you still want to be, you still have to consider your expenses and the number of units and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. So what would be some of those challenges then that you've seen so far when it comes to mobile home park investing?
Well, yeah, I would say the biggest thing is to make sure that you are, you understand if you're going to take on a park with water wells, that you understand and make sure that you get those properly maintained. The same thing with the sewage system. In a park, the other thing you would have to keep in mind is if you're taking on a mobile home park with park-owned homes, you have to decide whether you want to keep those, right, and keep them, maybe fix them up and rent them out, or whether you intend to sell them, right? And for us, given the choice, we prefer to sell them. So we aim to own the land, but not the units themselves,
Mm-hmm.
because it's from a insurance perspective, we don't have to carry the insurance on them, and we don't have to maintain them if the tenants themselves own the units. But that's on a case-by-case basis, on a park-by-park basis. Sometimes we like to keep the units and fix them up and then rent them out, because we can collect more in rents that way. But sometimes what we've done is that if we pick up a unit for say $2 or $3 grand, we'll drop another $6 or $7 grand into it to rehab it, and then we'll sell it owner financing for 15, 16, right? collecting
Hmm.
$5,000 or $6,000 down, and then spread the payments over 3 or 4 years for the tenant. And that works out pretty well. Just you got to know what you want to do with the park going in, right? If say the park has half of the units are park owned, well, what are you going to do with them? Do you intend to rent them out, or do you intend to keep them, fix them up, and then sell them?
Hmm. So, one of the things that I've heard previously is that when you have vacant lots, it's very hard to convince somebody to bring in a trailer house. So you almost have to do it yourself. How do you manage those vacant lots and getting them ready for a potential resident?
Yeah, so what we did recently is we purchased new homes. In one of our parks in Daytona Beach, Florida. We purchased new homes, and then we sell them. Again, it comes down to if your grandfathering allows you to put in another unit in the empty space, then you can do that, and you can choose to put in a used one or a new one. But in places like Florida, there's no shortage of people that are looking for empty spaces. That's one of the reasons we love Florida, is that there's such a migration. It's the number, I think this year they were like the number 3. Last year they were the number 1 migrated to state according to the U-Haul statistics. But this year they dropped down to number 3. But still, that's the growth that Florida as a whole is experiencing. We don't see an issue finding tenants and securing our empty spots.
Sure. So how do you come up with the funding, and how do you manage acquiring these new trailer houses to fill those empty spots?
Well, this last one, I paid for that one myself. But usually there's like not Century Tuna, and trying to remember the name of the lender that you can lend out on those. One of the things that we're doing with our new acquisition is we're going to pay for those ourselves on 2 parks. I'm buying one, and then my partner's buying the other one. And then we're going to use the rents to pay for the mortgage. And then at some time in the future, when we refi out of it, we'll basically exit. That's our exit strategy for those individual trailers.
Sure. So just again, if you like to hear more about what he's talking about, make sure you check out his podcast, The Savvy Mobile Home Park Investor Show. And I know you're pretty active on LinkedIn and Facebook and a few other places too. So I'll make sure to include those links in the show notes. Then I got to do a little self promotion here. If
Betcha.
you like this episode, please go to iTunes and give a quick review, because it really helps other investors find this show. So with that being said, I understand trailer parks are always kind of a mystery to me, and it's kind of one of those things that as soon as people hear trailer park, they think of the Trailer Park Boys or some of that type of stuff. How have you worked past some of that stigma, and maybe it's the location? I understand, like in Florida, it's a lot of like retirement villages more than it is what we see on TV.
Yeah, stigma is the right word. When I first talked to people, potential partners, yeah, that's an issue, yeah, right? You kind of have to talk about some of the realities. I think a lot of that stuff, the media, a lot of that stuff is overhyped. We haven't seen those sort of issues in our parks, and you're right. There's a lot of parks in Florida that cater to the elderly, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's not to say that some of those problems don't exist in some parks. There are some problematic parks. Florida in particular, I think they topped out at 25,000 parks in the state of Florida. So I'm sure there's some bad apples, but we haven't seen that sort of problem. We, at the end of the day, when we take over a park, what we want to do is we want to create a clean, safe environment for all of the tenants, right? So we do some basic things like, we ask any of the park or the tenant-owned homes that to paint the exterior of their homes. They have to clean up their trash. Unfortunately, if they have the big, dogs, the Rotties and the pit bulls, they got to go. We love dogs too, but the insurance doesn't cover those big dogs, right? So by doing some simple things, the tenants know that we're looking to create a safe environment for all of our tenants.
Mm-hmm. So have you ever had any situations then that you've acquired a park and some of these residents they're not in the financial position to do some of the changes that you're asking for? And if so, how do you handle or manage that?
Yeah, so we have had some of that. We work with our tenants. We try to create an environment where they'll be able um, to complete some of that stuff, and we'll work with them on that. We haven't had any major issues. Can't think of anything in particular, but um, most of our tenants realize that what we're trying to do is we're trying to clean the place up, right? And most of them are actually very happy to help out with that. So we want to create a clean, safe environment, and pretty much everybody's on board. We have had some with the tenant-owned homes. We haven't had any issues. Like any environment where we have renters, there's always some bad apples, and we have to evict them if they don't pay, that sort of thing. That's
Mhm.
kind of par for the course with mobile home parks. When you take over a park, there's always two or three people that refuse to play along. So we gotta we if that's the case, then most of our parks, they'll have like a month-to-month rent. So we just won't we won't renew their leases in some cases.
Oh, okay. And
Yeah.
then those cases, most of those people just leave the trailer house behind.
Yep.
Yeah. How in Florida, I know this is probably different from state to state too. Then how soon after do they vacate that can you take possession of the property or the trailer?
Um, that's a good question. Off the top of my head, I don't remember, but I don't remember off the top of my head. I hate to tell you
Oh,
something
sure.
that's wrong.
Yeah, and I'm sure it varies state by
Yeah,
state, so
it
that's
does.
something that people have to look into before they get into this. But yeah, it's so when you evict somebody and you take over the property, then you essentially assess the trailer and decide whether it's a keeper or it needs to be hauled out of there, huh?
Yeah, there's some of them are so old that you really can't move them. The city won't issue you permits, and obviously the insurance won't cover you. So we've had situations where the units are in such bad shape that really the only thing you can do is demolish it and replace it. And other places, in other instances, the units are, it's got good bones, and all we have to do is replace a few panels and some carpet and do some work to it, and maybe $10,000 worth of work, and that takes care of that.
Right. So in the end, you mentioned going in and acquiring these properties and making them safer and taking some actions. I would imagine that in the end, that likely keeps the turnover down.
Yeah, exactly. And that's one of the beauties of mobile home parks, is that the tenant turnover is like virtually, I want to say like it's under 5% as a whole for most of the parks around the country. Because if the tenant owns a home and they can't move the home because it's so old, well, then they're pretty much, they're not going to go anywhere, right? So they'll
Hmm.
keep paying. So that causes the turnover to be less than 5%, which is awesome. It just, what
Right.
that creates is just steadier cash flow for everyone.
Sure.
Mhm.
So outside of asking the residents to do a few things, what are the other low hanging fruit that you found that can clean up a park or turn it around or find some additional cash flow options?
Well, the big thing with the parks from the beginning is that there's still a lot of mom and pop shops operations that are out there, right? And many of them have owned the parks free and clear for 20, 30 years, right? And
Hmm.
in a lot of cases, like our first two parks, the owner hadn't raised the rents in forever. In some cases, 20 years. So a lot of the people that were living there, they were paying, $250 a month, and when the lot rents were closer to 600, right? So there's an opportunity there when you land a park like that to be able to raise the rent slowly, right? To bring them up to market over a course of 3 or 4 years, and be able to establish some decent cash flow for everyone. So
Hmm.
it's opportunities like that that we're looking for.
Sure. So we're outside of some of that, is there anything else that you've learned quickly that these mom and pops, they probably have done the same thing the same way for so long that they're just not, they haven't kept up with times and or maybe even rent rates?
Yeah, one of the things that we're finding too, as we're talking to some of these mom and pop operations, is they're tired, right? They're most of them are elderly. They're tired of doing the work, working with the renters. They don't have the money to fix the place up. What I'm finding is that we have an opportunity there to teach them about owner financing, right? Where they can, if they want to continue cash flowing, they don't get rid of the park because it's a source of income for them, right? They just don't have the money to do anything new or to spruce the
Mhm.
place up or even cover up the potholes and things, just simple things, right? So what we're finding is there's a really good opportunity for us to be able to educate some of these mom and pop operations on the benefits of owner finance, right? Where they can move themselves from the position of owner to the position of bank, right? And then we can take over as the position of owner and pay them, right? So they can continue collecting cash flow, and then we get we get excellent rates on a loan directly from the owner themselves, which is awesome. So we're
So,
finding more and more of those sort of opportunities.
right. So have you found, you mentioned that they are having a hard time keeping the property up to date and a few other things because there isn't money there. So what if that's the case, what makes it appealing to you? Like, do you typically find that they're not charging enough, or what other opportunities do you see that they're missing?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of them, a lot of times, like these first two parks that I was telling you about, they weren't collecting the rents they should have been, right? Because the market was up near 600, so there was an opportunity for them to make a lot more money than they could have over the course
Mm,
of many years, but they simply hadn't raised the rents, right?
mm,
And well, that's just, I mean, that's the way the business is, and then so there was an opportunity for us to say, okay, what's what can we do here with this property? Well, immediately we need to start raising the rents, right, and bring them up to market over the course of several years, right?
mm.
We don't want to be jerk landlords either. We're not going to raise the rents $100 a shot. There'll be slow increments over the course of several years, but the people there know that, yeah, the rents are going to start going up to market level.
Sure. No, that's really interesting, and you'll have to forgive some of my questions because
Oh, it's okay.
it this is such a newer topic to a lot of our listeners and I'm sure that there's a lot of interest there.
Yeah,
You know, the concept of a mobile home park is really appealing because you're essentially just like you're renting a piece of land. I mean, there's not as much to go wrong. Every time I turn a unit in an apartment or a house, I'm likely in there painting again or replacing flooring again or what have you. You really don't have that with a mobile home.
that's right.
Um,
That's one of the things that made it so appealing to us, is like the amount of work that needed to be done was so much less, right? And
right.
with the comings and goings of apartment tenants, yeah, every time somebody leaves, you're going to have to, you know, maybe fix some drywall or, do some minor paint job. Hopefully nothing big, right? But because it's natural that people don't stay in apartments very long, you have to kind of expect some of that turnover and some of the repairs that come along with that. Well, we don't see any of that with the park owned home, or sorry, with the tenant owned homes.
Sure. Like at the beginning of the episode, we were talking a little bit about, single family homes and some of that, but it's easy in a single family home to see comparables and to understand. I mean, it's a fairly simplistic process to do your due diligence. Like, what do you
Mhm.
do when it comes to these mobile homes? I know in Florida there seems to be quite a few, but like you said, unless they're grandfathered in some other states, that the inventory is rather limited, and I guess you base most of your decisions on a pro forma and some of the historical data.
Yeah, and there, in terms of comps for mobile homes and parks, yeah, we rely on our brokers a lot, and Zillow you can pull up information on units, individual units, kind of gauge
Sure.
what say a 3.2 might be going for in Daytona or down in Cape Canaveral. So you kind of get a feel for what things are going for. But right now, there's such a demand for homes, right? So we're in the process of purchasing new ones, and a lot of the local makers they've gone from 3 to like 6 to 9 months in terms of being able to deliver on a brand new mobile home. So, and it's because of demand, right? And the rising prices of lumber recently in the last 6 months, the cost of lumber has gone through the roof. So that's causing everything to go up, like just like anything else. But still, the demand for affordable housing is there. The demand for manufactured homes is steadily increasing. I think it's going to continue to do so because, like, in Denver, prices are becoming unaffordable for most people, right? If you're straight out of college, and can you afford a $500,000 home? Probably not, right? And that's what we're seeing here in Denver, and really in pretty much every major market. So I think there's going to be a trend over the next few years to downsize and to look for cheaper alternatives.
Sure. Yeah, it talks about cheaper alternatives. I even wondered if somebody could pull off some of those tiny houses in a trailer park.
It depends on the zoning. We were looking at that as an alternative in one of our recent acquisitions because it's in most parks, in a lot of our parks, it's got mobile home and RV zoning, and in some instances, we can make more money per month if we put an RV versus a mobile home. So it just depends on the area, the demand for that sort of thing. But in one park, all we could do is mobile homes. It wasn't zoned for tiny homes or RV. So unfortunately,
And most tiny homes are classified as an RV. Is that it?
I think it's got its own.
Designation?
Classification now.
Sure.
But it's not classified as a mobile home.
Sure. Well, I told you in a blink of an eye, we've spent 30 minutes chatting about mobile home parks. And before we wrap up, I ask one last question: is there a question you wished I would have asked you here today?
Question I wish I would. Well, one of the things that I tend to ask is, what does the future look like? And obviously, we don't know, but one of the reasons that we love the mobile home park space, in addition to some of the things that we talked about already, is because we see it as a more recession resistant asset, right? So whether the economy takes a tumble over the next few years, or who knows what the economy is going to be doing, but we feel pretty safe and we feel pretty confident that mobile home parks are going to feel the need for the affordable housing, and they're more likely to survive a big economic downturn over the next several years. So we like the asset class, and we're going to continue to build on our portfolio with them.
Sure. No, well, I appreciate your time again, and make sure you head over and find his podcast again. It's called the Savvy Mobile Home Park Investor Show. And I definitely, if you're on YouTube and you check it out, he's got partnerwithapex.com as one of the other sites. Yeah, he's pointing to it. And then, but I'll also make sure we have your social media links, because I know you also have some YouTube videos as well. It probably teaches quite a bit of this content.
Yep.
But I really appreciate your time again, and you're welcome back anytime.
Hey, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. I had a great time.
Well, thank you, sir.
Thank you.